We're going to look at psychosocial care for people with Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and to talk about that, we have Dr. Chloe Geagan, clinical psychologist at the John Walton Muscular Dystrophy Research Centre in Newcastle University, and Dr. Janet Hoskin, who's Associate Professor of Education at the University of East London.
Hello. Just center stage, go for it. I'm just going to see how this works first of all. Yeah, perfect. Hello everyone, I'm Chloe Geagan. So like we're just introduced there, I'm based up in Newcastle. I'm funded by Duchenne Research Fund, but work closely with Duchenne UK and the John Walton Centre as well, working on the psychosocial project. So Janet, who's sitting down here, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Dr. Janet Hoskin. I work at the University of East London. I'm an Associate Professor in Education, and I'm Chair of the Education Working Group for Duchenne Care UK.
So we're going to tag team a little bit today because I work mostly with young people with Duchenne or their physical health conditions. From a psychology point of view, we link a lot with schools, and this is going to be something we're going to have a think about all together this afternoon because Janet and colleagues are going to be doing a presentation straight after as well. So first of all, what do we actually mean by psychosocial? It's a bit of a vague term. It's going to mean something slightly different for every person in this room. Roughly, it's basically just how our thoughts, our feelings, how we relate to other people, so the kind of social side of things, and actually our environment, so where we grow up, the people around us, you know, where we work, where we go to school, the things that we like Chris was saying, you know, everyone has different things that they're into, so it's basically all of those factors together which impact our mental health. So psychosocial is just another way of saying our kind of mental health. We've been talking a lot today about the guidelines. So one of the things we've kind of been focused on as part of the project is trying to improve professionals' confidence in approaching some of these conversations in clinic. I know there's a lot of new families in the room, but there'll be some other families as well where mental health funding in the UK is very, very poor. It is quite difficult to get access to services. So one of the strategies we're trying to think about is the neuromuscular services, the people who you guys will be building relationships with over the years, trying to build confidence and skills within that group of professionals to support you and identify ways to get access if you don't have access to a specific mental health professional within your muscle team, okay? So there's 3 different versions of the guidelines that we've done. One, like we said, for neuromuscular professionals. As a mental health professional, we also have a lot of upskilling to do within the mental health realm as well. So anyone who's come across a child and adolescent mental health service, one of the things that absolutely really, really frustrates me is this is not an appropriate referral to our service because they have Duchenne, therefore they don't need our specialist mental health team. Or it's too complex because someone has Duchenne for us to do what we would normally do, okay? So there's a lot of, again, advocacy and upskilling of the mental health professionals, both in mental health services but also within schools, etc. as well. In Progress is actually getting a bit more of a useful version for families as well, kind of like you've seen the table outside, we've got multiple copies of different guidelines there, something that is hopefully going to be a bit more useful when you're approaching services or having discussions within your teams as well. Hopefully not too complicated of a slide, but this is basically what we call the biopsychosocial model. I know we introduced psychosocial a second ago, but we're obviously speaking in a room at a Duchenne conference. We cannot ignore the biological impact of having a physical health condition on your well-being, okay? So this is just a model of when we think about health, it's not just the physical health, it is all those other factors that kind of play in together to impact our well-being, okay? Applies for everyone here. If you're in pain, if you've not slept well, you're not going to be the best version of yourself, okay? If you have a physical health condition with medications, we know there's something that we'll look at in a second around the cognitive impact of having Duchenne as well, so it not just being a muscle condition, okay? There's the social side of actually just practically getting out and about, being able to access things, getting on a bus, going and finding the activities that are accessible. It's all these factors that come together that will impact on our health. Again, I'm very mindful there's lots of different ages in the room. Your children will be at different stages. What we would expect a 5-year-old to be doing is going to be very, very different from our teenagers. teenage years are always going to be fun regardless. But there is this combination of actually sometimes when we're thinking about what is the priority at certain stages, okay? So there's a little bit of we need to be proactive and plan for certain things, but at the same time, you need to pick your battles. You're not going to be able to tackle every single thing that we talk about today, and I know we've got lots of different presentations today and tomorrow. Sometimes it's having to prioritize what is the main thing at the moment that we need to focus on. And something that we've been speaking a lot about, it's been mentioned that we've had a bit of professional sessions yesterday and this morning of actually increasing support into adulthood as well. So a lot of the focus has been more on the younger kind of kids. We get like a lot of support from primary school, and then we get into secondary school. And then what after? What are you going to do then? You go to college, uni, you might work, but where do you get the support? And a lot of our services, again, from an adult point of view, do not have access to mental health support from that point of view. So it's something that I think the focus is kind of shifting towards a bit more. And we've got a lot of really good advocates and people with lived experience who speak about the importance of being able to access just someone to have a chat to who's maybe not a family member, or just being able to go out and about and do something that they enjoy doing. I mentioned there that Duchenne's not just a muscle condition, so apologies to people who have sat through talks before on this as well. But when we think about some of the factors that are with Duchenne, one of the things that we talk about a lot, so I work in neuropsychology, so basically how the brain impacts on your mental health and your well-being as well, and the involvement from a brain point of view. Okay, so we know dystrophin within the muscles, there's also dystrophin within the brain. Okay, so we know that makes some of our young men more vulnerable to certain difficulties. Okay, and those difficulties are going to make certain things more, well, just trickier day-to-day wise. Okay, so when we look at that, this is what they sometimes call the Big Ten. All right, this is just one way of picturing it, okay? If you were doing nice little niche categories of ticking certain boxes in certain areas, okay? So we've got cognition, so basically how we think. Don't particularly like using the word intelligence, it's our standard IQ side of things. It's one way of just being like, what are your general abilities? The reason intelligence is important, right, is sometimes what we'll see from an assessment point of view is someone's really, really struggling in school, so really struggling with reading or with maths or something like that. But we do an intelligence assessment, and some of our lads will be completely within the age expectation that we would expect, or a little bit higher, okay? So there's this flip side of sometimes it's something where I see a lot of teenagers and young men get underestimated because other areas, for example, such as we look at autism or social communication, so how we interact with someone might be a little bit trickier if you have Duchenne, okay? That might be for a number of different factors. It could be because you have autism, or it could be the fact that people treat you differently if you're in a wheelchair, okay? And it's not something that we can deny. That is just part of life of living with a physical disability. We also have the emotional side of things, so anxiety and depression, okay? Again, if we think of that biopsychosocial factor, there might be lots of different reasons we feel down or we feel upset about something. Or there might be lots of reasons why we're feeling anxious. But we also know, if we think of it from a biology point of view and having Duchenne, that you are potentially going to be more likely to experience anxiety, again, just from a biological gene point of view as well, okay? This is more realistic from a real life point of view, okay? If we're talking about academic papers and studies that get published, things are in categories. Real life, trying to tease everything apart is a really, really difficult thing to do, okay? We spent a lot of time during a workshop of actually the key thing of any mental health approach or intervention is literally just sitting down, listening to someone and being like, what is going well for you at the moment? What is difficult? And where can we kind of get in to try and improve something, okay? Sometimes that does involve going for a formal diagnosis of something, okay? The way the system's set up in the UK at the moment, it's a long process to get a formal diagnosis. We know that sometimes you can get additional support. Duchenne by itself should be enough for people to be like, oh yeah, we might need to put some extra support in school. We're not there yet. Again, it's something Janet's much more capable of speaking to, but it's again something that we're speaking a lot about within our project, and just generally something that's popped up a lot over the last 3 years. The psychological, basically how am I feeling? How am I doing? Our anxiety, depression, our coping mechanisms, okay? Again, super important. This is very, very different for different people. There's no prescriptive way of having to respond to stuff, okay? There's no right and wrong way of responding to things. What looks like oh, they just spend time in their room and they don't come out and chat. That might be someone having a break because they've had a really, really stressful day, okay? So we've got different coping mechanisms for different things. And the idea of identity development, so this is something that, again, we talk about a lot around, if you think about growing up with a physical condition, how that's going to impact how you perceive yourself, how other people perceive you, and the fact that you've got some additional challenges, and how do we support our young men to be confident, to be able to advocate for themselves, to be able to make certain decisions when there can be lots of decisions that you have to make. And obviously, Jan's going to speak about the social side a bit more. From a psychology point of view, we never, or we shouldn't really, just work one-to-one with an individual. That has a time and a place. Every time we meet with a young person or a young adult, we think about where are they coming from background-wise, who's in their support network, who's actually important to that person. So everyone sitting in this room, more than likely you're going to be some of the key people and support networks for your child, okay? And part of that is also, when we talk about mental health and the psychosocial side of things, is looking after yourselves as parents. Again, this is why we talk about having to prioritize certain things, because it is difficult at times, and sometimes it is having a bit of the space of where you get support and coming to things like this and actually being able to sit down and speak to people and just have a vent sometimes. That might be part of your coping mechanism, okay? But it's something that we always should be exploring when we meet with families as well. And this goes to the professionals of how are other people in the system managing as well, because if something's off in the system, it makes it harder to kind of look after ourselves mental health wise. Does that make sense? Which feeds into the social bit. So I'm going to zip it for a second and pass to Janet.
Okay, so when we're thinking about the social of the biopsychosocial model, we're really thinking about sort of society and how society supports or doesn't support us as a young person. So if you're thinking about how well included you are in school, in your local community, are you able to get out? Are you able to visit places? Can you book a holiday? Not very easily. If you're a wheelchair user, that can be quite tricky. So all these things, like most organisations aren't designed around people who have a physical disability. And so, quite often we have to do a lot of work to make sure that our young people are supported. And, schools have, for example, and we're going to talk more about education in a while, but schools have a legal duty to make sure that, that places are accessible and that you can get in there, but also, curriculum is accessible, that, making friends is accessible. So there's all sorts of issues around the social. It's not just about going into a building, it's also about attitude and culture. Do places welcome you? Do schools want you there? All those things are what we're often trying to challenge and trying to organise. Ableism is really about this, the systems that we live in are often stacked against us, and that if you're a disabled person, you can feel invisible and not catered for. And really that's kind of what we're trying to do, I think, with these guidelines as well, is try to show how important it is to be included and to have a sense of belonging. If you haven't got the education guidelines, make sure you pick them up afterwards outside, and we will be talking about education in a moment. So I think, shall I carry on with this bit? Yeah. So we talk about good well-being and good psychosocial well-being, but that's a really quite a tricky thing to have if you haven't got the right support in place. So if you're not in an environment where people are supporting you, if you don't have the right support at school, if you don't have somebody at home supporting you, then it is quite tricky to get good psychosocial well-being. And what we've done here is there's lots and lots of definitions for well-being. I'm sure that many of you are aware of them. So quite a contested word really, but we've pulled out 6 elements that we feel come up quite often in lots of different definitions, and we're just going to talk through those now and think about what does that look like for someone with DMD and how can you get that. So the first element of well-being we've thought of about the ability to feel positive, the ability to find something that you like doing. That's really, really important for all of us, for our well-being. And for someone with DMD, we're all very individual. All our kids are individual, but things that we know of, that we've talked to young people about that they like doing. A lot of people like doing disability sports, gaming, going to museums, going to the cinema, going to galleries, playing with Lego, all those sorts of things. So as parents and professionals, it's important that we find out, well, what is it that you really like? I know that's a kind of obvious thing, but quite often we don't really sit and think, what is it that you really want to do as a young person? What do you like doing? What would you like to do? And let your young person lead as much as you can. Having control and agency is another really important aspect of good well-being. And this is all about supporting somebody to have independence, really, making choices. It could be self-advocating and campaigning. It depends on the young person. Also having an understanding of what they're living with. If you've got something like DMD and nobody's ever spoken to you about it, you're probably going to feel quite anxious. But if you've been talking to your young person, at age-appropriate levels about their condition, then that is much more likely that they will have good well-being. And there are resource implications and actions for this. So, if we want our young people to be independent and to be able to go out on their own, then they need to learn those skills. So, as they're getting older, it's about, implementing a social care assessment, ringing up the social services child and disabilities team and saying, I've got a young person here who's disabled and he wants to learn some independence skills. He wants to be able to go out and about. He wants to go on the bus. He wants to have his own door key, so he needs somebody to support him. So these sorts of things, we can talk about independence, but we can't if we haven't got the resources in place. So it really is important that we think about how can we support our young people to have good well-being, and there are things that we need to be doing. Feelings of accomplishment. Again, that's something we all want to feel that we've really accomplished something, and that really does help our well-being. And young people, as Chloe said, can have a lot of challenges at school. There's lots of overlapping difficulties that can be present. Not all young people have all those difficulties, but quite a lot do. So what is it that we can do to make sure that our young person, can feel accomplished, can feel that they're a really good scholar? There's research done on children in the general population with ADHD that shows that actually it's not how well people do at school, but actually how well they feel about how they're doing at school that's really, really important for well-being. So we need to be encouraging. We need to be saying, well done, that's a really good effort. Thinking about being a real kind of having a growth mindset about how we talk to our young people. You've tried really hard, that's brilliant, well done. Rather than, oh dear, you failed your maths test again or whatever. And how can we work with school to do that? And we'll talk a bit more about that, so I won't say that now. Making friendships, of course, that's really important. If you're not going to school or you're not meeting other people, that's going to be quite tricky because it's really, really important to learn social skills. Really, some of our young people, as Chloe said, are on the autistic spectrum. That doesn't mean to say they can't have friends. That doesn't mean to say they can't be empathetic. But some of these skills really need to be learnt. And so there are things that we can do at school. We can work with school to support them and to support our young person to become, to have these skills that are necessary. Again, it's thinking, do I need to have an assessment with social care because actually he wants to go out to wheelchair football and I can't go on a Wednesday night because I've got yoga or something. I don't do yoga because I'm too impatient, but I think it's meant to be very good for your well-being as a parent. Looking at your local offer. I don't know if you're aware of your local offer on your local authority's website. There should be information about what young people can do, particularly if they're disabled, so have a look there. There might be things that your child might be really interested in. I know sometimes there's swimming sessions, there's all sorts of exercise, as well as, other things. Model railway things, I know can be quite popular. Okay, feeling included then, having a sense of belonging. If you go to school every day and nobody talks to you, or you don't feel welcome, then that's going to be pretty miserable and you're not going to have very good well-being. So, think about what sort of school can you go to that will include you. Have a look if you're at the stage of looking for secondary schools or primary schools. It isn't always the school that has the sort of, 99% A to C's or whatever it is now, 5 to 9 stars. It's actually the school that is welcoming, that will work with your young person. We want to have high expectation for academics, but also how are they going to be included? How is the young person going to learn to have friends and learn those social skills that are so important? And finally, good physical health. So of course you're all here today, which is amazing, and what you're learning will have a massive impact on your young person, so that's fantastic. As your young people are growing up, there's organisations like that Sam works for, he'll talk in a minute, like Pathfinders, and they have lots of sessions that you can learn about as your young person. You can encourage them to go, there's a session on aspects of health. I know they do other things as well, but that will be really helpful for that young person to take some kind of agency and to take some kind of independence to learn how to best look after their physical health. Okay, so we contacted a few young people that we knew, and we said, we just wanted to kind of, because we know that we've talked about lots of challenges, but actually what is it that makes a good life for somebody with DMD? I mean, the first thing that people said was, it just isn't anything different from what makes a good life for anybody. So of course, that's really important to remember. However, we've got some lovely quotes here, and I've got a quote from someone who just sent me something, so I'm just going to read those. Another young adult has just said, a good life with Duchenne is living in the moment but making the most of opportunities. Not every day is easy, but there are always good days. Focus on the good things and the difficult things are easier. He said it's also important to accept what you can't change and doing the things that you can, and spending time enjoying the hobbies you have and investing in your interests.
So hopefully what we're trying to show is that when we think about mental health support, it is a lot of the day-to-day stuff as well, okay? That idea of having your peer relationships, linking in with, support groups or just your mates when you're out and about in different places, does have a massive, massive impact on just how we're kind of doing day-to-day wise. Using the teams around you, okay? So again, you'll all have access to your neuromuscular service. When you get to points where you need letters of support, for example, use the teams that are there. Don't feel like you have to always be the ones like gathering all the information straight away and having to, there's a lot of things to juggle. So use those professionals that are around you who will be able to kind of support pulling together some letters, or, speak to people if you're kind of like, oh my God, I've said this 3 or 4 times and they're just not listening to us. We just need someone to tell them X, Y, and Z, even though I'm the parent. But then it's amazing how sometimes something that you've been saying for months will be heard with one phone call. There is, we are being realistic though that, there are points and there will be certain things where you will need to get external support from more of a kind of like specialist services. So when we start talking about psychological support referrals to, adolescent mental health services, or getting someone in who needs to do a bit more of that formal structured talking therapy, there are options out there. I know sometimes it feels like there isn't, or we're like, oh, there's nothing anywhere. Again, it is going to be based on where you live in the country, okay? And this is something that we are, again, speaking about a lot, is that kind of equity to access, where, a family in X point of England is going to be able to access all of these different services and provisions, but then if you live in the back end of Cumbria, for example, it can be a lot trickier, okay? So when we get to the kind of more specialist services, that is something that, again, we're trying to work on. It's a bigger kind of ongoing struggle with that, but there are options out there, and part of that is knowing what is available in your local area. And again, using the teams, so your neuromuscular services, that's what we're working on, is like each neuromuscular service should know what the options are. So again, you're not out there trying to find different options and pull it all together. Psychiatry then obviously is slightly different from psychology, but they will be more the formal, being able to diagnose mental health conditions, but also may prescribe medications, okay? So again, it's something that what we're seeing is not everyone's going to need that. Most people, realistically, that we have met, particularly, the majority of the time, are sitting near the kind of the top areas of the day-to-day support is enough. There might be certain trigger points or things that happen where you actually need a bit of an increased support, and then that pulls away again. And I think that's the thing of like, that's just part of life, isn't it? Where there are going to be certain points where things are more difficult, and how do we get the support at those stages? The thing I did want to mention, and again, it's just slightly rogue, because we know it's so difficult sometimes to get access to services, particularly through the NHS. I've been speaking to a lot of families who, if they can, end up going private, okay? Again, it's a word of caution. If you've got the resources, go for it. If it gets help in sooner, please be careful, because of the need for mental health services. There are a lot of things out there. So say, for example, anyone in this room could call themselves a psychologist. A psychologist is not a protected title. A counsellor is not a protected title, okay? There are specific professions that do have protected titles, and the reason that's important is it'd be like going and seeing a medical professional who hasn't actually done their medical training in the same level, okay? So there's no one has oversight of what you're actually doing. So if you choose to do private go down the private route, please just have a bit of a look. There's certain specific registers and stuff that people, professionals such as myself, need to be on to make sure that we're legit, okay? Or if you've got any concerns, again, feel free to speak to someone in your team, but it's just to flag it up, because we know that there's lots of services being offered, and it can be, again, quite confusing to know, are you actually who you say you are in some ways? Main take-home messages. Sorry, I have no idea what time, or we've run out of time, probably. Going loosely. So again, the main things are needs change over time, okay? There might be specific trigger points. So again, a lot of times what we see is primary school to secondary school, post-secondary school to what am I doing with my life type situations, or specific trigger points from a physical point of view, okay? So again, starting to use your wheelchair, starting to notice, you know, certain things that you were doing beforehand getting more difficult, and some of those physical adjustments can, you know, they do raise up certain worries and concerns, and that is normal. It's just being able to have the space to actually work through that sometimes. Early identification of additional learning and cognitive needs. So again, this is where your schools are going to come in handy. Janet's going to speak about that a bit more in a few minutes. The idea of actually just making some reasonable adjustments. This is what we're saying. It taps into the social bit of, if the day-to-day stuff is a bit easier, then that's going to have a positive impact on your mood, okay? And then what is normal versus what might need additional support, okay? So again, it's that kind of bit of when you go to your appointments, sometimes there's so many different things that we need to cover, or you might need to speak about from a physical point of view. Please don't be worried about mentioning, actually, do you know what, school's getting really tricky, or I've noticed he doesn't want to go out as much as well, because we're trying to get in earlier. So it's that idea of being like a bit proactive with our response, rather than something hitting crisis point and being like, oh my God, we now can't get him out of the house at all, okay? So it's that kind of idea of mentioning things earlier, even if you feel like it's not always relevant. That social and mental health stuff is, I'm biased obviously, but I think just as important when you go to your physical health appointments to flag it up to your neuromuscular professionals, okay? I'm going to be floating around. I think Janet's doing her talk now as well, but if anyone wants to have a conversation, I will be going this evening, but obviously feel free to email or anything like that in the meantime, or get in touch with the team who can pass on contact details. Okay? Yeah.